Hello, my name is Brian Kilcourse, and I'm with RSR Research in the United States, and I'm here with my partner Steve Rowan, my good friend Neil Wynne Jones, and Mayan Knights. And we're here to talk a little bit about something which we thought would be an interesting topic. We kind of comically called this Two People Separated by a Common Language. And this is all about the challenges and opportunities that retailers and their partners are facing in their markets and the similarities and differences between the UK and US markets and how we might work together to bring value to consumers. So that's just the overview. We're just going to have a chat, but first let's start with a little round of introductions. Maya, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Yeah, pleased to be here. Thanks to RSR and IORMA for inviting me back for a second round of our discussion.
Yeah.
My name's Maya Knight. I'm publisher and owner of Retail Technology Magazine based in the UK. I've been writing about technology that retailers use for about 27 years now. Started off as
Mm.
a journalist, ended up becoming a research analyst and director of technology research. Written a couple of books on Amazon and Tesco's Club Card, Digital and Data. I always talk about them being sort of the apex examples, and variously consult with retailers, technology providers nowadays, as well as taking care of the magazine. Really pleased to be here.
Maya, I was going back in my mind as to how long I've known you, and I was thinking that it's longer than I realized. I think we met in London in a show back
Yeah,
in the aughts sometime, if I'm not
yes,
mistaken.
exactly.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
followed up with a few good chats and lunches over the time at NRFs as well. Definitely.
that's exactly right. Well, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And Neil, tell us a little bit about your background and what you want to talk about today.
Sure. Okay. Well, I run a little business called Trithias Consulting Limited, which is probably a new name to most people out there. Although myself, I'm probably fairly well known in the British retail industry.
Right.
Spent the last 25 years working for the British government as a sector specialist for retail and consumer goods. So working on the international side of it, internationalizing chains of retailers, restaurant chains, whatever, taking them abroad, making them successful wherever they go, and finding them retail partners. My original background was the textile industry, clothing, back in the days when England had a textile industry. Uh, I lived and worked in the United States for a while, so I know the American side of it. I worked for Down River Mills, which is, well, in its time was the largest textile mill in the United States, one of the largest in the world. Sadly, they don't even exist nowadays, apart from as a brand of domestic textile. So they have sheets and pillowcases, probably most of which is nowadays imported. So all the old mills closed long ago. Lived and worked in let me see, Colombia, Brazil, Hong Kong, for Peru for a little while as well, for my sins. Finally went to work for the British government, so I've been helping other businesses not make the same mistakes that I used to in the old days. Since I retired from there last year, I decided, what am I going to do now? Right, well, a lot of my clients came to me and said, can you still work with us? Can you still help us internationalize our business? Can you help us find partners overseas? So that's what I do for a living nowadays.
I'm thinking about, I remember the days when fine English wool was really English.
Yeah, yeah.
And those were the suits that you wanted to have. Those were the good
We
ones.
we still make those suits, but nowadays they cost about $3,000 each. Whereas imported ones from Eastern Europe probably you can pick up for £200-300. There's a lot of difference. We still make some of the finest quality worsteds in the world, but it's a very much restricted industry.
There's a premium
Uh,
for that.
when I
Definitely is.
was when I was an executive at a retail company, where it was definitely a button-down shirt operation, and I had to have several suits. And my colleagues gave me endless grief about the fact that I had a preference for English worsted, and they felt that I was getting too liberal of a bonus or something to be able to afford those kinds of things. I can't fit into any of them anymore, but
Yeah,
but they were
I
nice while
must
they
admit,
lasted.
since COVID, the world has changed sufficiently. I have a wardrobe full of suits. I
Yeah.
can't remember the last time I wore one of them. My rack of ties is still there. I have some beautiful ties, but again, when was the last time I wore a tie?
That's so true. That's so maybe we should all one day when we do one of these just all wear ties just for fun.
Oh, that would
But
be a hoot.
Not
That would be
me.
a hoot. Formal
I'd
dress
have to find
webinars.
them first. Yeah. Well, Steve, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you
Sure,
do it.
sure. There's some commonality here that I'm picking up. Maya, I don't think I knew that you started as a retail specific journalist. I started that way as well. I started actually put myself through school working in retail, so retail has been near and dear to my heart for as long as I've been of working legal age, which in this country was 15 back in the day. But started as a retail specific journalist, went into the software world for just a cup of coffee. And I've been an analyst for almost 20 years now. Neil, you said something that I really liked, which is you're trying to help people not make the mistakes that you used to make. That's essentially, a big part of our business model is we try to help retailers make all their mistakes in private, right? They're still going to make mistakes. We just don't want to make them have them make them in the public domain. So a big part of what we do at RSR, I don't want to be stepping on Brian's toes here because he and I are both founding partners, but a big part of what we do is we survey retailers on one side, usually a couple times a year. We'll talk about the store, we'll talk about merchandising, we'll ask them about loss prevention. And what we find out from those results, we then turn into the other half of our business, which is typically advisory work with the technologists who are serving the retailer community so that we can help them get their message straight so that when they're working with retailers, everyone's making all their mistakes in private. The technologists are making sure that their message is really strong based on what retailers are telling them, and retailers are getting a technologist that's coming to them that knows a little bit about them and has a solution that actually is not just in search of a buyer, but is actually in search of or in service of a need that needs to be filled. So that's a little bit about us and what we do. And Brian, you could probably round out anything that I missed there.
You did a good job, Steve. I don't need to talk too much more about RSR. I got my first retail job, believe it or not, in 1972 at a company which has long since gone away. It was called Joseph Magnon's. It was a high-end women's clothing store, and it's where I met my wife. So it was a successful operation for me.
On many frontiers.
In many ways. I got into retail IT in the mid 70s and actually about 1977 because in those days, if you showed any willingness to work with computers, people would just train you and get you on. And I had a great career as a retail technologist. I became a CIO in 1990, and I was until about 2002. I left my company in 2002 for all the reasons that CIOs in those days left their company. I gotten through Y2K. I was definitely done. It was time for me to move on. And I worked through a couple of venture capitalist companies in the Silicon Valley area in California, where I live. And I was essentially the implanted business guy for their invested companies. So my job was to talk to these geniuses and try to find use cases that would apply to their technology. And that's where actually, at least for me, that's where the kernel of the idea that became RSR first was planted. I did a brief stint as a CEO of a B2B media company in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. I did that long enough to know that I didn't want to be the CEO of a B2B media company. But while we were there, we started what became RSR. It started out as a division of that company. And my partners, Steve Rowan and Paula Rosenblum, and I bought the division and went solo in 2007. So that's how we got started. At a cosmically bad time, I might say, because that was right before the Great Recession. And if you had told me that we were going to get into the financial deep waters that we were in immediately, I wouldn't have done it. But I'm glad we did it. I'm glad we persevered. And here we are in all kinds of tumultuous times again. It seems to be never-ending tumultuous times. And that's probably the thing to talk about. Over in Britain, you folks have had 5 wild years. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's been tough on retail, hasn't it, over there?
Yeah, yeah. I think the word I used to describe it was the Macmillan word of the year 2023, maybe 24, was permacrisis. It's permanently some kind of crisis. That's
Yeah.
now in the English dictionary. So yeah, it's been really, really tough. There's a lot of lessons I think the US retailers could learn. There are, particularly from Steve's point of view, picking up on his point, don't make the mistakes that we did. Learn from our mistakes. I'll let Neil add his thoughts, but I think, to sum it up, margins are even thinner than they used to be. The wage bill is going to go is going up because of higher taxation, national insurance, and minimum wage hikes. The turmoil, geopolitical turmoil, has impacted. So it has had a socio-economic impact on our consumer. We call it the cost of living crisis over here. Yeah, discretionary spend is really constrained right now. And so there's a really tiny operating window for profitability for any B2C retail, travel, leisure, hospitality operators out there. They have to be really smart, really nimble, and they also have to dial into the fact that this is all happening at a time when, if you compare it to your birth of RSR as an independent company, Brian, we weren't glued to our phones 24/7 either. So the channel bifurcation is making the landscape that they have to play in, even though it's got a narrow window of profitability, that much broader, including international competition. I'm sure we'll get to tariffs at some point, but I think I'll stop there and ask Neil whether or not he agrees and whether or not I've missed anything.
Certainly, Myra, I agree with you on virtually everything that you've said. We're living in such a different world now. Each time it settles down and we think, yeah, now we can start getting on with business, something else is going to happen. Obviously, the latest thing is the Trump issue and what's happening with American tariffs. I mean, we can go into that in detail later on, but retail is probably, bricks and mortar retail is probably having the toughest time it ever has right now. Everybody's going around trying to cut costs wherever they can, using AI for cost cutting, for forecasting, for whatever, to try and stay that little tiny bit ahead of anybody else. But the originality seems to have gone out of a lot of the business now. So to have a high street shop with all the additional costs, minimum wages, as you said, our our business rates, all the other costs that keep being loaded upon us by the government on that, it's very hard to make a decent living on the high street. E-commerce is a different thing, but even e-commerce is having its problems now. The profitability of some of those companies. Look what's happened with some of the big guys like ASOS, Boohoo, who were the bright-eyed boys of a couple of years ago. They're struggling nowadays. The additional costs that they've got as well. It's a time where, let's say, as I said at the beginning of this, would I go into retail right now? Probably not, but we're all in retail, so we have to stay in it. We have to find a way of making it work.
We've been in it our whole lives. One of the things we do at RSR is we do some sales training. We don't do it often, and it's focused on horizontally aligned sales teams. Teams that sell to not only retail but to manufacturing. It might be to education or government or finance, and they only have a passing knowledge of how retail works. And the essential tool that we use to highlight how retail works is a typical P&L. And I have to say that these salespeople, when they realize just how little retailers have to work with, a typical retailer, if they're well run, they have their EBITDA line is about six pennies on every dollar. I'll use US dollar. If they're lucky. So they have 6 pennies left, and they have to pay their rent, they have to pay their loans, they have to pay their taxes, and they have to pay their stockholders. And so maybe at the end of the long day, after all that work, after all that effort, they get to keep 1 or 2 pennies for every dollar stuck in a register. It's a miserable business from that perspective. And the reason I share that with them is because we try to say, look, they're not knuckle dragging Luddites. They just have to be conservative because they can't make a mistake. They just can't make one. In the meantime, I think, Maya, one of the things you said that's really important is that, and it sounds like a canned part of a speech. We say that one thing that's changed, and it's such a fundamental change that we take it for granted, and that's that we now carry a world of information in our pockets and purses. And so the world is our assortment, and we can find whatever we want, wherever it is, and we can always find the best price and get it delivered to our door. And that has put the consumer in control of the dialogue with retailers. Retailers don't tell consumers what they're going to sell. Consumers tell retailers what they're willing to buy. And that's such a fundamental power shift. Now, Steve, and you just finished a study that talked about how that's really impacting the store. So you
Yeah,
might want to share a little bit about that, and we can compare and
sure.
contrast.
Yeah, we've actually just published it today, but it's interesting. I think about everything that the sort of dire picture that Neil and Maya just painted, right?
Mm,
So I guess I'm going to push a question back on them based on what we're seeing here. One of the things that we think sets apart our research from some of our competitors over here is we're former retailers, right? We're not just beating people up and saying, my gosh, you've let the situation get completely out of hand. You've let the customer get the upper hand as far as they know what they want to buy and where they want to buy it, and they're beating you up on price, and they can have anything delivered to their door from their shelf, while they're in your store and they're smiting you. We recognize, as everything Brian just talked about, that empathy is a really big part of this, right? We've all been in their shoes, and we recognize there's a lot that's happened very quickly. And to ask these people who are working with such thin margins, now sort of triage all the things that you have to do, all the investments that fair play, stalled a little bit on, investments in shoring up the supply chain, investments in your workforce and making sure that they're a little bit more helpful than the average in-store employee has been, historically. Investments in the store itself, in making it cleaner and brighter and safer and, more exciting. Investments in your inventory and making sure that, it's slightly, differentiated. Neil, you talked about it. There's not a lot of uniqueness going on up there. The thing that we use as an undercurrent in all of our research, and it certainly appears in our latest store report, is we recognize there's a lot to do. The question is, how are you going to triage it? And for us, there's no one size fits all, clearly. But for us, the real place to start is the store itself, because 80% of US retail, at least, still concludes in store. And it doesn't take long. If you've been to this country and you've walked into a store and you only did it 20 years ago, there's a pretty good chance that store still looks and feels a lot like it did the last time you were here.
Sure
There
does.
hasn't been a lot of change. So that's kind of the gentle nudge that we keep providing is, yes, there is a lot to deal with. And certainly with the supply chain as concoct as it is right now, and we've all said we're going to get to the tariffs thing at some point. But we're sort of nudging people towards, if there's one place that you have control, look within your own four walls and see what you can start to do there, particularly as it relates to the people that you're hiring to work in those stores. And there's been a sea change of change or sea change within the workforce. And that's another whole topic I'm sure we could spin off on for an hour. But also the look and feel of those stores itself. And I'm wondering if Neil and Maya, if you're sort of gently guiding people in the same direction.
Well, I would certainly say that, look, as you said, everybody can buy anything that they want to online. They can go to a million retailers online and get exactly what they want delivered to their door, like
Right.
within 24 hours. So if you're running a high street store, what can you do to your store to still attract people in there? You've got to change your store. You can't just put nice little pretty racks of clothing up there, and hope that somebody's going to come in and buy it. You can't. Advertising, marketing doesn't work as well as it used to. So how are you going to get them into your store? The one area which seems to be successful nowadays is experience. So look at the average high street in the UK. My high street where I live in Richmond, the high street has changed from lots and lots of shops selling things now into lots of cafes, lots of lots of nail bars, lots of hairdressers, things that you still have to actually go out to do. You can't get a haircut online. You can't get a barber to come and trim your beard online. So these appear in the high street, and they're replacing all the traditional retailers who are going, like to say, out of town warehousing and whatever. So you've got to try and change your format and your offer into something which is going to really interest people to get them to come into town. Whether it's adding little corners to it which are of interest to them, putting on a little bit of showcasing or whatever, entertainment experience, that sort of thing. But you've got to do something different. You've got to come up with
And
new
I would just
ideas.
tack one thing onto that. And if they have actually gotten off the couch and come to your store, the very worst thing you can do at that point is disappoint them wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to reward them. If they have taken a leap of faith and come with it, opened your shop door, please don't disappoint them.
Maya,
Right.
you've written quite a bit about the fact that, yeah, and I think the UK really led the world in a lot of ways. The only other nation that strikes me as having been pushing forward with that digital physical connection is Japan. They probably ahead of everybody, but the UK caught on to that wave pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but still about 75% of all of your sales go through a store. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my whole career has been kind of smiling right at everything you said, basically because it's not a humble brag or a sales pitch, but this is exactly what the book that I wrote with Tim Mason, the
Yeah.
former marketing director that launched Clubcard back in 1995, was the point he was making. He actually wanted to call his book How to Out Amazon Amazon. Um,
Have fun with
but
that one.
obviously, yeah, the publisher wasn't going to go for that. So we ended up calling it Omnichannel Retail: How to Build Winning Stores in a Digital World. And apart from having been cursed with becoming the the
That
poster
was
child of omnichannel.
1995 you guys were using the word omnichannel?
No. So interestingly, let's roll it back a bit, because you made me think of so many things. Everything the three of you have said. Roll it back a bit. Amazon IPO'd in 1995, and Clubcard launched in 1995. Right?
Right, that's right.
We've been living with this stuff, digital, how to use digital to sell to people. All Jeff Bezos ever wanted to do was work out how to use these screens that we're all looking at through, talking to each other through now, to sell our stuff. And he's done that so well. He's taught us all how to do it.
Yeah.
Clubcard was how to use the data that customers are willing to share about themselves and their activities, their transactions with us, to sell them more stuff, to go out and find more like them, and then to run my business better as a result. But what was frustrating Tim when he decided to write the book is, I still, literally, he would say this to me, I can look up eggs and have Google turn by turn direct me to the store. But when I get to the store, I put my phone away. We wrote that book in 2020, it came out.
That's right. I remember that actually.
And one of the title one of the chapters was how to make your store digitally available, make it live in the digital world. At least make sure your Google listings are up to date for basics.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There are links we can make, but what you made me think of in terms of taking it back to your research and what I think American retailers, because I'm sorry, the shopping experience. I was in Chicago 3 weeks ago. The shopping experience is still hideous. I mean, you do some things really, really well, but that whole swathe of Walgreens, Walmart, all of those, they're not great. They're not great. Neither is UK grocery, to be honest. Tesco's operates on a 1.4% margin, spends about 2 to 3, maybe 3 to 4% of its turnover on IT. Amazon spends 20%, but then we know it's a tech company first and a retailer second.
Yeah, but that goes to Neil's point. I mean, in grocery, you can have that experience, just like going to Savile Row and getting a bespoke suit, but there's a premium. There are some really fancy pants grocery stores here, but you're going to pay $12 for a gallon of milk.
One of the things you're
Sorry.
talking about, and you're all talking about this issue, and that's that. So what is it that consumers, what causes them to still go to the store? And
we're human beings. This is what we're discovering with Gen A and Gen Z, right? That we still like to hang out. Shopping is a social experience. To Neil's point, experience is what sells. I've just written a blog about the Anya Hindmarch village of 6 stores in Chelsea, where she's a brand. She can afford, a high-end brand, accessories, handbags brand. She can afford to launch concept stores 6 times a year, where they rip out an entire one of these stores. And right now it's a fully fledged dive shop, with a shark coming out of the window kind of thing, and something to go and see, something to delight. But I think the most important thing that retailers haven't truly got to grips with or realized is there is power in that. There is power in the store. There is power in the fulfillment in store to have them come back again, to be a more valuable customer, both online and in store. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that during COVID, BOPIS, as you call it in America, or click and collect as we called it here, saved a lot of stores, right? Kept a lot of stores open. People started to remember why stores were important. But to Steve's point, and I'll stop after this, is that you said, they might have put them off. They might have been conservative. I'm a little bit more hard on retailers, because right now Tesco's makes that margin when I go in and I do all the work for them.
Yeah.
I'm scanning,
Right,
packing,
right.
bagging my own goods,
Right.
right? And they
Right.
still only ask me who I am as I'm walking out of the store.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
so,
and you could have
isn't that
got this
so,
cheaper somewhere else. Here's a
isn't that
voucher.
so 20th century, right?
They've been too
Yeah.
slow, too conservative. They've put off a lot of digital investment into the store. We used to talk about a mobile makeover for the store. Everything should be. You've got a long tail as well. Don't forget, we've got 5 generations living, working together now. We're going to have half of the world's population being digital natives by 2030 that won't have known anything but a swipe screen, touch phone. We've got, yeah, it's, you're absolutely right. You've honed in on exactly the right point that we've got to digitize the store. We've got to make the store more profitable, more efficient, more automated as a result.
What,
You know,
what did we call it, Brian?
you
We called
touched
it the last tech-free zone.
the last tech-free zone, yeah. Well, Steve, I want to key on something Maya said, and it goes back to something you said, Neil, and it is all about why people go to the high street store now. And there's a lot of social content in a store. That's one of the things that we need to remember. And I go back to my CEO, the guy I worked for 20 years. He was very adamant that retail was in the entertainment business. And the first time he said that, I thought, oh, I'm sorry, you've fallen off your rocker now. But our job is to sell product, you know. But I came to realize how true it was. But it was always in the context of people fulfilling their needs. It could be fun, you know. One of the things that's happening in the United States, and my own, just preempt this by saying my opinion is a lot of people who are playing with this have gone overboard with the entertainment factor. They're trying to make something as something, an experience akin to an amusement park. I don't think people need that. They just need for it to be enjoyable in the context of what they're trying to do. So if, for example, you're shopping for a big meal that you're going to have for your friends this weekend, that could be a fun experience. If you're shopping to the recipe, you're shopping to the related items, and you're envisioning what a great meal you're going to put on the table for all your friends. That could be fun. Getting a new suit. Steve experienced this a few years ago, having to get a suit because he was going to get married. That doesn't have to be a chore. It can be fun.
Well, the funny
But
thing about that is I started with one retailer and I gave them all my full faith and confidence, and they took 8 weeks to make me a suit, and I had 2 weeks before my wedding, and it showed up, and it didn't fit anybody. It didn't fit me. It didn't fit them. And I thought, you had laser measurements, you had every bit of technology in the store, you had every bit of sparkle, and now I have 2 weeks until I'm about to stand in front of God and everybody else. I got to get a suit, and I had to go old school. I had to go to Nordstrom's and get the real tailor, and perfect. But they did it under pressure, and so that was a case of, sometimes tech isn't the answer. Sometimes being competent is the answer. You know.
well, this does bring us to a tech question. And Neil, I think you mentioned AI. AI, we've been writing about AI, and we're in a weird conundrum. It's a great technology, and it can help us to do things that we couldn't do before, but it is not going to cure world hunger. And it's not a magic bullet for anything. It's just the latest technology. Retailers are looking for ways to use AI to better predict or to forecast what's about to happen so they can be ready to respond quickly. In the meantime, the popular press, the tech press, is talking about how humans are going to find themselves out of work because AI is going to replace everything. I just don't buy it. What's the word on AI over there? What's the chat?
The thing about AI is it is not creative. It's a way of gathering a huge amount of information in a very short time. I can ask a question to AI and get an answer back instantly, which would have taken me weeks of research to do.
Mhm.
Forecasting, absolutely great. But where's the originality? If everybody uses the same AI to forecast what they're going to be doing next year, every shop is going to look absolutely exactly the same. Everybody's range is
Beige
going to look
tunics for
exactly the
everyone.
same. Where are the original designers? Where's the originality going to come out of that? It's not. That comes from the human input to it.
There's a creative process, and we actually saw our very first AI-enabled creative workbench. We've seen We've
Mm.
seen, the merchandise planning from the time that you're starting to cut purchase orders and get bids and those kinds of things. But somebody actually has applied AI models to the creative process itself. And I have mixed feelings about this. As a technologist, I thought that's pretty awesome, right? That's a good use of the technology. The other side of me, the guy that worked in a women's clothing store back in the early 70s says, that's no fun. That there's nothing fun about this. Because you're right, if we're going to have everybody looking the same, and that doesn't appeal to me.
Well, just this morning, I walked through John Lewis department store through the menswear department. I was just cutting through it. I thought I'd have a quick look around, right?
Yeah.
Every range looked exactly the same. They were all very nice garments, very nicely made. Look at the labels on them. They've got some great labels in there, but they all looked exactly the same. The only one, I'll be honest, that actually stood out, and that was purely by color, was Ralph Lauren. Because they go for the bright colors. Everybody else was going for the grays, the browns, the blues, and whatever. They had the
Right.
bright colors. It made them stand out, made them different to everybody else.
The same could be said for cars. I mean, you take a look at cars, they're all sort of becoming this one sort of homogeneous shape.
Yeah, exactly. And all designed by AI, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Is this where we tell jokes about Elon Musk's
Oh,
truck?
no.
I mean, but don't you guys see? What? On one hand, as technologists, we expect change to be very, very rapid. But when you become a researcher, you understand change is barely even generational sometimes. But in that regards, we have seen a huge amount of change during our lifetimes. I think actually, the boomers and Gen Xers still have something to add because we lived in an age where we didn't have everything at our fingertips. So it is easy for me to empathize with the younger generations coming up wanting things to be a little bit more authentic, a little bit more real. Whereas I think we've kind of got carried away with the digital age. I mean, when retailers were enjoying double-digit growth online, they didn't think to invest it in their stores. I think they are overly conservative. I think they don't they prefer to be a fast follower than an innovator. But when I think about innovations in the past that have involved technology and really moved the dial for retailers, we've already covered Amazon, but you mentioned John Lewis, Neil. Back in the early aughts, John Lewis was the very first retailer in this country to make Wi-Fi available across its entire store
That's
estate.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
I was telling the story to a bunch of e-commerce merchants in Birmingham at an event yesterday, actually, with a lady that worked with the guy that put that system in. And the guy that put it in at the time basically said to me, I'm seeing people in my AV department. We're a different department store. The AV department's down in the basement. They can't get a signal. They're there on their phones in front of the TV saying, what does Amazon cost? How much is Amazon's price? But they can't get a signal. They go upstairs and out the door to get a signal. They see the price, but they don't come back. And that was before John Lewis got rid of its never knowingly unsold sort of will match the price opportunity. So they didn't even they lost the opportunity because they weren't enabling digital. They allocated online sales by postcode. They were the first one to do that because managers called them and said, this is not coming off my total.
Right, they did that.
And people naturally just thought, I see John Lewis online, I see John Lewis on the high street, I'm just going to take it into the high street. But the retailers hadn't thought the processes through. At every point on this journey of digital discovery and development, retailers have kind of waited to find out what they need to do rather than actually being proactive about doing it. And when it comes to AI, they say the same thing about AI that they say about data, which is, I'm drowning, I don't know what to do with it, I don't know where to start, to the triage point. And I will say, what I say is start with the customer and work backwards, which basically is upside down from the way you've worked before. If you know who your customer is, you can reverse engineer what they're going to want by their needs, missions, and journeys. And AI is just a tool, to Neil's point. It will never really give you an opinion that isn't just aggregated from everything else, and it will never have empathy. So use it to manage by exception. Manage your business at scale. We hear smarter, faster, cheaper all the time. Those are the three areas from an automation, from a profitability perspective, accuracy, that AI can really help you with at the moment. But last thing I'll leave you with as a kind of question to throw back to you guys is, I've heard, and I think it's true, don't try and do all three at once. You can only actually ever do two of those things really well once.
Well,
Once you've done it,
an
then
old
you
ad
can
in
differentiate.
carpentry when somebody would show up to build something at your home and they'd say you could have it done right, you could have it done fast, or you could have it done cheap. Pick two. Because if you want it done fast and right, it ain't going to be cheap. If you want it fast and cheap, it ain't going to be right, and on it goes. And it applies. It absolutely applies. If you want something done properly and you want it done quickly, it's going to cost an awful lot of money.
You know, we should save one topic for next time, and I know that we'd have a spirited conversation about it, is as it relates, all this as it relates to the supply chain. And my generation of retailer perfected the mass merchandising model, where we rationalized the assortment. We said, this is what we're going to sell you, and we buy in huge quantities and we distribute it out. We'd keep some of the unit cost of goods savings as profit, and we'd deliver the rest of it as a lower cost of good to, not a lower cost of good, a lower retail price to consumers. But in this new world, and we've written a lot about this, but we don't have any magic answers here. Retailers are looking for much more nimble supply chains, and that's one of the places where AI can really help. The question that let's save for next time, and I'd love to explore this with you, is how do you still preserve the cost of goods advantages that we've spent a lifetime trying to achieve, and not buying in these huge quantities that we used to? Because clearly that those big quantities of merchandise limit our agility. We need to be agile, but we still need to be efficient. And we'll save that for next time. But
certainly supply chain is a major issue at the moment,
Yeah.
especially with what's happening. Look, we like everybody else, we exported our entire manufacturing industry out to the Far East, mostly to China. Now that's coming to bite us in the ass when it comes to exporting to places like the United States. You can't import Chinese goods. We might have a new free trade agreement. Well, free trade agreement is a misnomer. There ain't no such thing as free trade.
I was going to say, let's talk about what the meaning of free is, right?
That's a whole different discussion, and it's going to change over the next 30 days as our negotiations go on further with America. But the supply chain and where are we going to source our goods from is a major issue, I think, for all retailers now, and it will be over the next year or so.
It really will. And Mr. Trump,
my only sort of final comment on that was stop trying to be the cheapest, try to be the best instead.
Yeah. Can I just jump in and say, I know we need to have
Please.
a much longer conversation about this. It goes to the heart of the profitability question, absolutely. But I think, retailers need to look at lots of different, there's nothing wholesale that can be done. There's lots of little things that they need to do. I think they need to look more at consumer to manufacturer rather, so small batches on demand. That's what Shein does, right? It works for them. Localized assortments, we're getting there with that. But finally, what I'm hearing about AI is, a forecast, a machine learning forecast in the past would only be its best on day one. Whereas because you've now got AI that can take on bigger data sources, more varied data sources, including the customer, loyalty information, it will only be as good on day one as it is on day one. It will only get better from there. And now supply, I think with going back to the permacrisis thing, a supply chain and VP of product said it very well. He said, the Pentagon has a battle plan for Sweden, right? Not that they're going to use it, but it's there. And so AI can help.
Why would we do that to those poor people?
But this is the point.
Who knows if they're going to use it? Maybe they try to annex
plan. Exactly, for every single country. And I think in that regard, dealing with permacrises, dealing with trade routes being disrupted, you have to have a battle plan. You have to have alternatives in place. Zara is a great example. Zara sells to 90 countries, sources its product from over 70 countries, but brings it all back to Spain. It's all vertically integrated with RFID, so they have accuracy built in. And they're one of the biggest fashion retailers in the world. We won't talk about sustainability and environmental impact, but in terms of how it's done, Zara, from its stores to sort of its website to its supply chain, is a really good one for us to look at, and a nice one because it's not American and it's not British.
I actually agree with that, and it's a good story. We'll have to explore those things when we have more time. We're almost out of time now, so we can't do that. But one of the things I think that I'll leave the AI discussion here. Retail is a reactionary business. Something happens, retailers react. You know, people's taste change, retailers react. A new band comes in and changes the culture, retail reacts. The nature of AI is that it can help retailers anticipate, and so their reaction times can be much more quick, and there isn't that gap between some fashion trend emerging and the retailer being able to react to it, or conversely, something bad happened in the economy and retailers having to react to that. So it shows great promise. Retailers in our research anyway are still grappling with what that means. I've said it in speeches that forecasting used to be a project. You did it in preparation for the next selling season, right? And basically you ran at variance from day one, just as you said, Maya. Now forecasting is a process. It's running all the time, every day, and it's ingesting signals it's getting from all kinds of places. Competitor, weather, market data, maybe a big sporting event, and it's happening in town, something like that. And retailers are trying to close the gap between an event happening and their reaction to it. That's all good. The implications of the supply chain are profound, because the supply chain doesn't move that fast. It's the people like to think that, oh gosh, a new fashion has come out and suddenly a factory in China whirs up and starts cranking this stuff out, and within a couple of days it's in the marketplace. That's not what happens. There's still for example, in the United States, there's still a 2-week journey from an outbound dock in China to an inbound dock in the United States. It takes a while to get there. So there's a lot to think about, and the problem all goes back to the P&L, and it goes back to the fact that retailers can't waste a penny. They don't have a penny to waste. So how do we achieve these? How do we make stores entertaining? How do we make supply chains nimble? How do we to close the gap between events happening in the world market and retailers responding to it? If Mr. Trump makes a speech and sends a shockwave through the entire world, how do we react to that quickly and in a positive way?
I think
You
I
could say
think
that for
AI is definitely there to help. Retailers need
yeah,
to lean into it more in that regards, have their battle plans, be able to diversify and decouple their supply chains and the sources of raw materials and so on. I really
yeah.
think yeah, the moving of the super tanker days have got to go. They've got to go. Maybe if it means, like you see in the sci-fi movies where the super tanker breaks up into lots of little parts and goes into it, does their constituent things. We've got to start thinking in a much more intuitive way in that regard. I don't know about you guys, but in terms of, I think we set up the dynamic that the UK is a bit of a microcosm for all the digital store related issues that we've seen, because we've been facing them for a lot longer. That goes back to the consumer, and what I'm seeing in the British consumers trends at the moment is give me a reason to buy. Price always going to be most important. If you can't give me a good price, give me a promotion. But if you can't give me a promotion, it's no longer proximity. It's recognize and reward me for my continued custom. We're great at doing that online. We're great at chasing you online and trying to personalize things online. But where does that happen when I walk into your store? I think if you start to bridge that gap, cater to the long tail. Don't forget those people that still want a human being to talk to, and an informed, knowledgeable member of staff. But if I want to go in and self-serve and have an immersive experience through my phone too, yeah, join up those dots, and then you're going to have a much better view of the customer who's going to help you run your business better.
So I'm going to paraphrase what you just said, because it resonates with me, and that's that if all you're playing is on a price and convenience platform, you will lose. You'll lose to Amazon, you'll lose to Walmart, because they do price and convenience better than anybody. And in Amazon's case, they have this big web business to underwrite all of their investment and everything else, which is not a luxury that the rest of us have. So the real question is, what are the other value attributes that you can add to your brand that make you interesting to a consumer? Maybe it's quality, maybe it's uniqueness, maybe it's some other buzz factor. And one of the things that when we talk to retailers, we ask them, what's your value proposition? Tell us what's your value proposition to the consumer. And they'll say, well, we offer great products at great prices. And I say, no, not good enough. What are the attributes of value that make you special, that make someone go past your competitor in order to experience with you? What is that? And those turn out to be difficult conversations, I will be honest. Because of course we all as retailers think that our stores are the best in the land. That sometimes it just isn't true. We have to cut off, unfortunately, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface, which I guess is a measure of a successful conversation. So we didn't talk about American beef in European markets, especially in the UK. Let's not go there.
That's an interesting subject in his own right.
How do you feel about
The good news is,
antibiotics?
Brian, these are easy to schedule. We found that we can put these things together really quickly, so we should be able to put together another one in no time flat.
Yeah. Anyway, let's leave that subject all by itself, and we'll talk about food quality another day. Sounds like we have another topic right in mind. We could talk about the impacts of this new world on supply chain. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. So let's put that on the docket for another time. And in the meantime, thank you very much for everything that you've shared today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers
Take care,
now.
all.
Good to see you.